Okay, I think we'll get started here. Welcome everyone, my name's Tom Holmes from Tangent. Welcome to the second part of our Power BI series, Microsoft Power BI series. This is a technical deep dive. Welcome back if you joined us last week for an introduction to Power BI. We're going to go a little deeper today. Parker's going to take over the reins in just a moment, but a few housekeeping things before we get started. Parker's going to try and get through this as much of this as we can within the hour, and I'm sure questions will come up. You feel free to ask those questions in the panel, or you can hold off and we'll set some time aside towards the end and answer them. And obviously, you're able to ask us questions after the webinar by sending us an email. So with that, Parker, I'll hand the reins over to you and we'll get stuck in here.
Great, thank you, Tom. Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of this series. As Tom said, in this part, we're going to take a deeper dive into just how you would build a dashboard such as the one you're seeing on your screen. This is one of the dashboards that I showed off in the first part of the series when we were talking about what exactly is Power BI and how it can be used for your organization. But in this part, we're actually going to build this entire dashboard from scratch. So this is a one-tab report that gives you full visibility over some financial data. So everything you see on your screen, you're going to be able to create by the end of this hour. Hopefully we get through all the items here. In case you have or have not used Power BI Desktop in the past, there's going to be a lot of basics introduced in this hour, and also some advanced functions in case you may have some experience with Power BI. So there's a little bit for everyone here. So with that, I guess we can go ahead and get started on building this out from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new file, and we are going to see a blank canvas here. If you have Power BI Desktop in yourself, you can follow along. If you want to try to keep up with some of these examples, if not, you can just you can just watch as I go through these steps, and we will provide the finished product to you via email after this webinar. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you open up a new Power BI file is you're going to want to connect to your data. So there's a very easy way to do this. We do this by going to the Get Data button, and we are able to see all of the different connectors once that loads, all the different connectors that we can use to connect to the data sources that you can possibly hope to connect to within Power BI. So we can sort based on the different kinds of connectors, flat files or databases or online services. For our purposes, we're going to load a CSV file in directly. So we're going to double click on that. I have this file called sales.csv that we'll also provide to you as well. We can select that file and click open and automatically load that data into Power BI. So what's going to happen here is it's going to show a preview of your data. We have the option to either load it into our data model, or we can click edit and further transform this data in case we need to. For these purposes, let's go ahead and edit it, and it's going to open up what is called the Power Query Editor. As we talked about in last week's webinar, Power BI is extremely powerful because it provides Power Query as its back-end data transformation system. You may have used Power Query if you have used Excel in the past to a deeper extent. Power Query allows you to make the transformations necessary to bring in your data in case it's messy, transform it into a more usable and into a way that you can build a report off of. So as you can see on the right side, Power Query automatically creates these steps that it's going to go through in order to connect to your data, bring it in, and clean it up. So you see the first step is called sort. It's connecting to the file based on the file path that I specified. Next is promoting our headers from the first row into the headers. And then finally, it's automatically detecting the column, the data type of that column. So we can see on the second step, we see that all of our columns are text values based on this ABC next to all of the column headers. But we see that our third step actually automatically detects that data type. So our dates are transformed to dates, and our numeric columns are now either decimals or integers, depending on what data type Power Query actually detects. So all this stuff is done out of the box. All we have to do is click close and apply, which will bring this data into Power BI and allow us to start building these visualizations. So give that just a moment to walk through those steps, and we can see our table loaded in on the right side. We have all of the columns that were available in our CSV. Now we just need to start building our report. So we'll take another look at our report that we're going to be building. So we can kind of break this down into components. We see a bar chart, we see a nice map in the middle, a gauge, another bar chart, and a line chart. So a couple of the advanced features that we're going to dig into today. You see some conditional formatting along a couple of these visuals. We're going to get into that. We're also going to get into some advanced calculations around time intelligence functions. So you can see that my bar chart here on the right shows current year versus previous year, as well as a % change metric. So we're going to get into some really cool time intelligence functions to allow you to calculate previous period metrics very simply out of the box in Power BI. And then we're also going to get into some forecasting. As you can see on the bottom right line chart, we have a forecast for our data. I'm going to show you a couple of different methods in order to forecast via a line chart today. And finally, we're going to get into a very interesting feature called RowLevel Security, which is going to allow you to be able to specify who can see what data. So in case you have a report that you don't want to necessarily show all of the data to every user, we can set it up dynamically to filter down to only certain sections of that data, depending on their role or their username. So I'm going to show you that as well. So with that, let's go ahead and start building out these visualizations that we see in this file over here. So the first thing I'm going to throw in is a normal vertical bar chart. So there are a bunch of built-in visualizations that Power BI provides to you out of the box. So one of them is this horizontal clustered bar chart. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. That brings the basic visualization onto the canvas. Next, all we need to do is drag and drop the fields we want into these wells that automatically pop up here on the right side. So we wanted the retailer country in the axis and our revenue, which is a numeric field, in the value, which makes a nice bar chart for us. Nothing too special there, but pretty easy to do with just a couple of clicks. Next, we also had a map on the page. Power BI offers a lot of different maps. Actually, in the basic visualizations, we actually see 4. We have one called a map, we have a filled map, a shape map, and an ArcGIS map, which is very customizable. My favorite is actually the shape map, which allows you to specify different kinds of maps that, let me get rid of this. Sorry, I double clicked on the screen, which creates a new visualization. Let me try Control Z out of there. There we go. My favorite is the shape map because it allows you to specify your own maps, and I will get into that in just a second. So we can take our new map and throw in a couple of fields here as well. Our location is going to be based on our country field, and our color saturation, the color of that country, will be based on the revenue. And as you can see, by default, it shows the United States of America, which isn't necessarily what our data is based on. Our data is based on data from a bunch of different countries. So we can alter this map to show us a world view. So if we go to the formatting tab of this visual, we can click on shape. And right here, you can see that the map is set to USA states. We have a bunch of different built-in maps here, but none that really fit the bill. We have different country states and some different regions of different countries. This is where the shape map becomes very dynamic. We are allowed to import our own file to show a map of our choosing. So I have a map downloaded. It's in the form of a topo JSON file. So that is a JSON file that has already created these borders and divisions within a map. This will also be included in that email with the data in the Power BI file as well. So all we have to do is import this JSON file directly into our map. And we see we have a custom map of the world based on that JSON file. So that's all we need to get the map that we need to throw in the middle here. I'll respace some things. Before we get too far, one little housekeeping item. This bar chart, we have grid lines. I don't actually want those grid lines because they get in the way of our map. We can switch off our grid lines. So this is a good segue into the formatting features of the Power BI visuals. If you click on any visual within the canvas, we have 3 tabs here. The first tab allows us to specify what data fields should be tied to which labels within the visual itself. normal visuals have an axis, maybe a legend and a value, similar to how you would build a visualization in Excel. The second tab is all of our formatting features. So we are able to change the color of things. We can change the font size or the font itself, changing the grid lines, transparency, pretty much anything you need. So that's pretty much all we need to do for formatting on that bar chart. Our map is looking pretty nice. I'm actually going to change one thing. By default, I want to auto zoom, which is a fun kind of capability. If we are to click on a bar on the left side, let's say we click on Mexico, we see that our map is automatically zooming into Mexico. So pretty cool functionality there. We can also click on a single item within the map as long as we select it. We can click on a single item of the map and it's going to filter our bar chart as well. So pretty cool out of the box capabilities. You can also already see how Power BI is creating these powerful connections between these visuals. Next, we're going to create a gauge. So we're going to create this gauge here. Gauges are great in order to show values and goal, basically your value as you get closer to a goal. So we are going to temporarily just throw in our revenue in the gauge, and we'll further build this out. So there are a lot of different fields here for a gauge. We have value, we have minimum value, maximum value, target value. If we throw in revenue in the value, we see that by default, the gauge is going to create basically half of the gauge filled, and our max value is going to be double our value of the revenue. So we'll come back to this later, but we're going to set this maximum value to be last year's goal. So in real world applications, we're probably going to want to exceed how we did for last year. So if we set last year's revenue as a goal, that would be a nice goal to be able to visualize in this gauge. So we'll get to that in just 1 second. Next on the page, we have a bar chart. Let me extend the date range out a little bit. We have a bar chart showing basically our current period versus last year's period. This is also able to be drilled down into, let's say, into 2017 itself. We can drill in and look at it on a quarter basis. We can drill down and look at it on a month level as well. So if we drilled into Q2, we see that April, May, and June make up Q2, and we're constantly seeing that selected year's value versus last year's value. So very dynamic there. If we drill up to the top, we can see just how 2018 did versus 2017, and also that percent change, which is basically the difference between this year and last year divided by last year. We'll go through all those steps as well. So we're going to set up this measure to calculate dynamically. Measures are very important within Power BI because they are going to calculate based on the filters that are applied to that visual. So if you think about calculation and as you throw it in different visuals, it's going to calculate differently based on the different filters that the visual imposes. For example, if I were to throw in a calculation into this bar chart on the left, it is going to calculate differently for each specific item on the axis. So it's going to calculate once for United States of America, once for Japan, once for China. But alternatively, if I throw it into a visual like this with the date on the x-axis, it's going to calculate based on the date specified for that value. So let's go ahead and start building that measure. Specifically for time intelligence calculations, it gets a bit tricky if you are to look at previous period metrics unless you have a date dimension table. So by default, let's take a look at our data real quick. We have all of our data here. Basic sales data. We have revenue, cost, quantity. We also have the date that the sale occurred. So it's not always the case where you have one record per date. So we want to create a date dimension table so that we can join the date dimension table to this table in order to do all of our filtering for us. So we can create a new date dimension table. We will click on the modeling tab, click on new table. We're going to create a date table from scratch. Very easy to do. There is a handy function called calendar. And calendar takes two dates, a start date and an end date, and basically creates a one column table with dates from your start date to your end date. So our start date, knowing our data, starts on the first of January of 2016. So all we need to do is type in 2016-1-1. So that's January 1st, 2016. And we want to end on the last day of our data, which I know to be 2018, 12/31. So that is our entire range of data. We can click enter, and we have effectively created a new table, as you can see on the right. So we now have our date table. If we click on the data view, we are able to see this date table by clicking on the date table itself, called date. And as you can see, we have the dates from the 1st of January 2016 until the end, which is 12/31. Change that the way that looks a little bit because we don't need time. We can click on the column itself, click on format, date, and then we can date without the time. So it'll display a little bit better. In doing so, we're changing the way it displays across the entire report. So if we wouldn't have done that, we would have seen that timestamp everywhere if we were to throw it on the report. So with that, we can create our bar chart, and we can throw in our date column in the axis and our sales or revenue in the values. And you're going to see an error here. We're going to see the exact same value for every year, and that's very common, common issue that comes across for people just starting out with Power BI. They wonder why they have the same value over multiple divisions of their data. Another example of just why this is occurring is if we were to create a slicer, which is used to filter your entire report based on our new date column, we can filter all we want and see that none of the data changes. And after a little bit of investigation, you might find out that this is because we don't have a relationship set up between our date table and our sales table. And we need to set up that relationship in the model view within Power BI. So this is another drag and drop interface that allows you to create these relationships simply by taking one of the columns that you want on one side of your relationship and dragging it onto the column of the other table. So we can take the date column, throw it on the other date column, and it's automatically going to create this relationship based on what relationship it detects. So we see that it has by default created a one to many relationship. The star means that this fact table may have more than one record per date. So it's created this one to many relationship with a filter direction from the date table to the sales table. What that means is a filter from the date table will affect the data shown in the sales table, but a filter from the sales table will not affect the date table. So there's only one direction. We can make this bi-directional, but that's usually best practice not to do so. So we will leave just like this. Now we can see that our data will change as we change the dates in the date slicer. So our selection on the date table is filtering the sales table. So now we can leave that date slicer as is, open to all the dates, and we can get into that time intelligence calculation. So a measure is created by right-clicking on any table. You can click New Measure. I'm going to put this measure on the date table. Measures are agnostic of tables. They basically need somewhere to sit, but they don't necessarily need to be on a certain table. It doesn't change the way they're calculated. You can put them on any table you like. We're just going to put it on the date table since there isn't much going on in that table. It's just one column. So I'm going to call this this year's sales. And this is an easy calculation. It's simply sum of revenue. And what this is doing is it's going to calculate sum of revenue for each filter on the visual. So we can go ahead and click enter. And we can throw this on inside the value well. If we take this year's sales, we can see that this is the exact same value as the value we had in previously, because previously we were just throwing in revenue in the value field, and it's by default summing it. So we can sum revenue this way. We can sum revenue by creating a measure, this year's sales, and throwing it into the value. So it's the exact same way to get there. But what's better about using this method of creating a measure first and throwing it in the field is that you can reuse this measure in future calculations so that you can further develop a more complex function. So we can go ahead and get rid of revenue anywhere we have used it. We can switch it out with this year's sales. That's pretty much all of our items so far. So we'll just switch these. And then finally for the map itself, which was colored based on this year's sales. And there we go. So now we're going to create that the measure to look at last year's sales. So we will call it last year's sales. And we need to use the calculate function. This is the most used and most important function within Power BI. For reference, Power BI, or the code to write these functions, is called DAX. DAX stands for Data Analysis Expressions. And it's a little bit tricky to learn, but once you get a hold of some of the basics, it becomes very easy and very, very useful in order to create a more rich data model. So we're going to use the calculate function, which basically allows us to evaluate an expression with a specific filter. So we are going to simply use our created measure that was called this year's sales. So we want to calculate this year's sales specifically for a filter that we're about to specify. And the filter we are about to specify is going to be another function called same period last year. This is an example of a built-in time intelligence function that is going to look at the current period of data and then switch the scope to look at the same period but last year. So in case we're in our bar chart on 2017, it's taking 2017 into account, then last year's scope, and then making the calculation. So Power BI is able to set the filter first and then evaluate the expression. So same period last year takes one parameter. It takes a specific date. So our date column that we are using on the x-axis is the proper date we throw in here. And that's the entire calculation, very powerful calculation in just a couple lines. So we can throw this in to the values as well. And we see it's working as expected. We see our 2017 is around 500 million, where our last year sales for 2017, which would be 2016, is 437 million, which is the exact same as the this year's sales for 437 million. So with this calculation, we are able to create a percent change over year very easily. So I'll create one new measure, and I'm just going to call this percent change. And this is a simple division. We will use this minus last year's sales in parentheses and divide by last year's sales. So we can throw this percent change in tooltips, or just for visualization, let's go ahead and throw this in the value. It's a very large percent change for 2016 because it's infinity, because there was no last year sales. It's actually a good point. Instead of using division within Power BI, it's best practice actually never to use the division operator. There is a function called divide, which allows you to set a case in case there's a divide by 0. It allows you to set what you actually want to show. So we're actually going to do that again. It's just this year's sales minus last year's sales divided by last year's sales. And then finally, your alternate result you can set as 0 in this case. And we see that our percent change from 2017 or 2016 to 2017 was 14%, and our percent change from 2017 to 2018 was 10%. We can format this percent as an actual percent by clicking on the percent button up here on the top in the modeling tab. And now we have percent change over the years, which will be dynamic. If you were to click on different bars, we see just how that percent change stacks up across the different countries. So very easy, very quick time intelligence functions. There are a multitude of time intelligence functions that I can't go into detail here, but pretty much any way to shift the scope of your date range, you're able to do so within Power BI pretty easily. So this is just the last kind of point here. This is dynamic as we drill down into certain years to look at quarters, or instead maybe on the month level and day level. So very dynamic calculation there. That brings me to back to the gauge. If in case we want to make last year's sales our goal, we can throw that in the maximum value, and we see that this year has already surpassed last year's sales pretty easily, and that'll pretty much be the case with this data set. Finally, let's go ahead and get to the last visualization, which is a line chart. We'll go ahead and make a little bit of space here on the canvas. And let's throw in a line chart here. We have a couple of options for line charts. The default line chart is a good one. Let's go ahead and click on that. We'll drag it down to the bottom right. And similarly to how we've done it previously, we can just throw in date on the axis. And by default, you see that the axis creates a what's called a date hierarchy from year, quarter, month, day. That may be what you want, like in the bar chart above it. Sometimes you may just want to show all the day values. So we can click the drop-down arrow and click on date. And then finally throw in this year's sales into the values. And we see our data, or this year's sales for every day of our data set. Let's go ahead and filter that down just to see a smaller sample size. So at this point, I want to show you a couple of methods in order to create some out-of-the-box forecasting. Very cool stuff. So I've walked you through this first tab, the Fields tab, to throw in, to tie your data to the different wells. I've shown you a little bit about the Formatting tab to change all the formatting options. Finally, certain visuals have this Analytics tab. This Analytics tab allows for some pretty cool visualizations or some additions to the visualizations. For example, line charts allow you to trend lines just by clicking add. You can change the color to that trend line. We see we're trending downwards right now. We can get rid of that trend line, click average, and get rid of that. Finally, the important one here for me is the forecast tab. The forecast tab, a couple of parameters that we can put in. We have a forecast length. We forecast out 10 points. We can also forecast out a certain number of each chart. It's looking on the daily scale. So 10 points is actually 10 days, same thing, but you can do points in case you have a hierarchy and your scale is dynamic. So I'm actually going to forecast out, let's say 30 days, or points in this case. We have the option to ignore a certain number of points in case you have some irregular last couple of days of data. We can set a confidence interval, 99 in case you want to be very certain to be within your forecasted range. 95 is a pretty good out-of-the-box method. We can click apply, and we see it doesn't actually provide a nice forecast because it's automatically trying to forecast that seasonality. And seasonality is when you have, let's say, sales data that might increase or decrease depending on the time of year, maybe the time of the month. For a lot of sales, you're going to see an increase around the Christmas time or maybe around certain holidays, depending on the products you provide. So that you're able to set the seasonality in order to set a more accurate forecast. So our seasonality, we are going to set up depending on the date range that we have specified. So we see we only have 6 months of data here. So we can create a seasonality based on 30 points, which would be around a monthly seasonality. Click apply, and we see that forecast start to be created. You know what, I'm actually going to go ahead and copy this onto a new tab to make this a little bit bigger and easier to see here. And lastly, I'm going to go ahead and grab that slicer as well, throw that on the page. It's going to ask me if I want to sync the visuals, keep the slicers in sync between the tabs, but it doesn't really matter for our case. So now that we can see that forecast a little bit better, we can change that color. Instead of black, we can make it a nice red or so. Set the transparency. If we were to extend this date range out a little bit, we would want to change that seasonality to be more of a yearly scale. So we'll normally see some increases and declines throughout the year. So if we were to set a more accurate scale here, more accurate forecast, we can set the seasonality to be 365 points. And it creates a more, it's basically going for the forecast a little bit more. It's saying that this is a better idea of what you can expect based on this yearly seasonality. So very cool stuff. We can also extend this out to 90 days in case you want to get a little bit more of a forecast. So it's pretty cool to be able to see what you can maybe expect with 95% confidence that the value is going to be somewhere around there. So this is the out-of-the-box forecasting. I'm also going to take you into one custom visual that allows for what you might consider as more accurate forecasting. In order to do that, we are going to import a custom visual. So Power BI provides you these 30 some odd out-of-the-box visuals, but there are custom visuals that have been created by Microsoft or even a third party. And these visuals will allow you to do a lot more things on top of these built-in visuals. So we can import from the marketplace, which is where you'll find all of the certified and available custom visuals. So we see we have a bunch here. You can see, just their use cases, a lot of different visuals that you won't get out of the box. We will search for forecast and see what comes up. We see that there are a lot of visuals that are around forecasting. I find that this forecasting TBATS visual does a very good job of providing some good forecasting. So I'm going to go ahead and click add. What this is going to do is it's going to add it to our file, and you see it right here. We can hover over it and see it in the bottom below the built-in visuals. I'm going to go ahead and delete this visual and start from scratch. So if we were to bring in this visual, it's going to ask us if we want to enable script visuals. And this is important because this visual is actually running some code in the background to run some machine learning and able to understand just how accurate of a forecast it can provide. This visual specifically is running R code. R is a programming language, a data analysis language that will allow you to do some very cool things. So in order to run this visual, you would need some code or some R to be installed on your machine. Power BI also includes Python visuals as well. So if you have a visual that runs Python code, you'll need Python running in the background. But in our case, just to show you a demonstration of some of the forecasting, I'm going to enable the R script. And then I'm going to throw in the same fields, my date field and my this year's sales field. And you can see in the top right, it's spinning. So it's just thinking through that model and how to best show this forecast. You see it has the flat line forecast, just like the previous one did. We have some forecast settings here that will allow you to set the forecast length. Set to 200. It's going to go ahead and think again. It should still be flat. And then we can set a seasonal factor. But this one allows you to set two seasonal factors, so it's very interesting. Firstly, we can set a yearly seasonal factor and a, let's say, weekly seasonal factor in case you have sales that matter. Maybe Monday through Friday is your hot time, but Saturday, Sunday, it dies down a little bit. We can set two seasonal factors. So this is a very interesting view of a more advanced forecast that allows you to set a couple of seasonal factors in order to make sure you're understanding your data correctly. So you can see its confidence interval here, which is currently set to 0.995. So 99.5% confident that you are going to fall within this range. And it's 50% confident you're going to fall within this red range as well. So yeah, pretty cool visual, interesting introduction into custom visuals. You can search the store and find a bunch of different custom visuals to do a lot of things. A lot of things that you may need have already been built by other people within the Power BI community. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go back to page 1, leave the forecasting the way it is, and just touch on a couple more items here in order to further build out this report. So I'm going to add one more filter here just to show a little more filtering capabilities. So remembering our slicer is what is used to filter items on the page. We can bring in a new category. We can call this product type or bring in product type. And we see we have these 5 product types available to us. So cooking gear, lanterns, packs, sleeping bags, and tents. We are able to show this visual, these slicer selections in a list or a drop down. So we can select based on a drop down. There are also options to allow for multi-select or single select depending on your needs. So we can further create that, select something down to, let's say, lanterns, see how that data changes. And then now I'm going to show you a little bit about the conditional formatting features within Power BI. So this is very important in case you have a point you're trying to get across. Colors are a very effective way to convey ideas and results. So I'm going to go ahead and click on our bar chart on the left. We are going to conditionally format this to show a color scale, so a larger value, or maybe let's say a green color for a larger value down to a red for the smallest value. So we can create, we can go in the formatting tab and create this conditional formatting by going to the data colors. It's a little bit hidden, but if you hover over the ellipses in the top right, you can click on it and click on conditional formatting. and we can format based on a color scale, based on a certain field. Our certain field that we have in that visual is under the date table. It's that this year's sales. And right now it's going to create a red to green color scale from lowest to highest. We can click on diverging and put in a nice yellow in the middle and click OK. And that's how easy it is to create conditional formatting within your visual. A couple of other options just to let you know what is available to you. You can format based on rules or a field value as well. So if we were to click on rules, it would be, let's say if our sales are greater than 300 million for this year, then we can make that yellow. If it's less than a million, we can make that red. Basic rules in order to prove your point or show your point better to your stakeholders. So really dynamic stuff there. We can also create conditional formatting on this map as well. It's not necessarily conditional formatting, but it's more the color saturation of the countries itself. So our color saturation is set up on this year's sales from red to green. We can go to the formatting as well and look at our data colors. And right now it's set up this data color of our map from red to green. We can create diverging, and it's going to create a very similar color scale from the default red, the default yellow, and default green. So these are the default colors within Power BI. So you'll see these colors a lot. If you have a specific color palette in mind, you can go about by changing these colors by entering in a hex code if you have that. But what's probably better is to build out your Power BI report based on how you want it without any color formatting. And you can import a theme. So the theme will take over and basically change all of the colors within your Power BI report in case you have maybe a company-wide theme that you can just use across multiple reports. Not in the scope of this webinar, but just know that that's out there. So really the last item I really want to touch on that shows some more of Power BI's really powerful capabilities is RowLevel Security. And just as a refresher, RowLevel Security is going to allow you to filter down your data set automatically depending on who is looking at the report. So let's say user A is only allowed to see countries from North America, whereas user B is allowed to see all of Europe. We're going to be able to specify if user B is looking at the report, he's only going to be able to see Europe's data, or user B, she's going to only be able to see North America's data. So it's very easy to set up within Power BI. So under the modeling tab, we have a couple of buttons here: manage roles and view as roles. Under the security group, we can click on manage roles, and this is going to allow us to create these different roles. And all we have to do is click create and name this role. I'm going to call this manager Europe. And then we are able to specify which tables should be filtered down. We can select a filter on each table we want to, but for our purposes, we only want to filter down the sales table. So we can specify some code here, some quick code to allow us to set that filter. So the first thing we do is we type in a column name. So as you can see on the right, here are all of our columns available to us in our sales table. So specifically, we have a continent field. We want to only show the continents where the continent is Europe. So if we set continent equals Europe and click save, we now have a role, if we click on view as roles, of manager Europe. So if we click on manager Europe, click OK, we now see our data only showing Europe's data. So we see the values have been filtered down. We see that the items on the axis have been filtered down to only show European countries, and the map has been pre-filtered and zoomed down to Europe. We can create another role to really nail this idea in. Manager North America. Same thing. We talk about our column called continent, and we specify only North American continents. Click save. And then we can stop viewing as the European role, view as the North American role. And now we're filtered down to North America. So just one more quick example. We can create a role not based on continent, but based on something else. Let's let's take a look at what we have available to us. We can stop viewing as the North American manager. We have product types as well, so we're filtered down to lanterns. Let's remove that filter. Let's say we have someone who's an analyst based on a specific product. We can create a role for him. So we can create, so we can go with cooking gear. We can rename that to, say maybe he's a cooking gear analyst. Specifically, we can filter that sales table down to just product type equals cooking gear. So what that's going to do is it's going to filter our data set down, but it's also going to limit what we see in our slicer. So if we want to look at the cooking gear analyst, see our data has changed, but our slicer only allows us that one cooking gear icon, or the one cooking gear selection. So very important aspect of Power BI. Important note here, we're going to publish this report up to the Power BI cloud. I will go ahead and take you through that. Firstly, you need to save this report as you want. I will call this financial demo 2, because I already have a financial demo. So we have this report now created in Power BI Desktop. We need to publish it up to our Power BI portal, which is where you and the other members of your org are going to interact with the report. So we publish this up to a workspace. A workspace is, give that a second, a workspace is a location where you can collaborate on reports and data sets with your peers. So I'm just going to publish this to my workspace, which is my personal workspace. This won't have, no one else will have access to this. It's only my portal, or only my little area within that portal. So depending on the size of your data set, this may take longer. This isn't too long of a data set, so it shouldn't take too long. And success, this has been published up. We can navigate over to our Power BI portal. We can see all of workspaces that we have available to us, my workspace on top, as well as some shared workspaces that you may have with your colleagues. We can click on my workspace and see all of the dashboards, reports, and data sets we have available to us. We see I have a couple. We just published up financial demo 2. So we can open that up and see the report we just created, just kind of the bare bones of that report before any formatting was really put into the report. We can go back to our data sets in order to set up that row level security on that data set. So this is the important note. Once you publish up a report that contains row level security in the background, you need to configure it in the Power BI portal. So we're configuring the data set to specifically let users or assign users to those specific roles. So let's say my role should be as a manager for North America. We would click add, or maybe user B should be set up as a cooking gear analyst. So you would assign these roles. You can assign based on individual emails. You can assign it based on Office 365 security groups. So you can assign large lists of people to these different roles to specify just what they should be able to see within the report. So we can click save. So now I'm saved as a North American manager. Click on these ellipses. And in case we want to test the report to make sure it's working correctly, we can click on test as role. And now we view the report as a North American manager. We can click this drop down, switch this up just to view this based on another role, and view that just to make sure it's working up in the cloud properly so that no one is going to see data that they really shouldn't. So we also have permissions, the ability to set permissions on the report as a whole to be able to specify user A should see this report or not. So there are a lot of options in order to set up that security to make sure that only data is viewed by the proper eyes. So really with that pretty much finishes up the build out of the basics of this Power BI report, all the little components that go into creating a dashboard. From there, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to a dashboard that looks a little bit more visually appealing with a title, with some color to it, some items that make this look a little bit more refined. But other than that, that's pretty much our report right there. With that, if there are any questions, I guess I could take those at this time. I think we still have a little bit of time left.
Yeah, thank you, Parker, and no questions just yet. I think everybody's just absorbing all the information. Obviously, this is one aspect of Power BI, but it gives you a good understanding of how the different visualizations can work. But there's a lot more that can go into it. So I think that's going to do it for today. I do want to let everybody know that that Tangent does offer a dashboarding program, which we'll send out following this webinar, where we can help you build your first dashboard and using your data, using your relevant data, and we can do it at no cost to you. So we'll be sending information out on that. If you're interested, please do let us know. Also, if you, with respect to licensing, we can have a discussion about licensing individually, but if you're in possession of G5 licenses, you do have Power BI already as part of your subscription. So chances are you might not be using it, and we can help you use that and leverage the tools that you already have. So with that, we'll sign off for now. You'll get a recording of this as well as some further information about the Dashboard in a Day program. Thank you again, Parker, and we hope to see you for our future webinars.
Thank you, everybody.